Hi, welcome back to another episode of Opinionate, in which we depoliticize moral debates and talk controversial issues with guests. So today we have with us here Hugo Jiang, who is a vegetarian and also a Buddhist. And one of the things that we want to explore in this session is what is the relationship between a person's moral and religious views, and also what is the best way to see the vegetarian issue. Hi, Hugo, how are you?
Hi. Pretty good. Just woke up. Uh,
That's great.
yeah,
I just woke up as well. So the first question, I guess, is like, how did you get into vegetarianism? When and how
yeah,
was that decision made?
yeah, of course. This is always where the conversation begins.
Hmm.
So, long story short, it was, well, almost 3 years ago already. So it was the
Hmm.
summer of 2020. Can't remember
Hmm.
clearly. But I was traveling in the northwestern part of China, a beautiful place. So I went to a lot of Buddhist temples there, and my mom has been a vegetarian for long, like for almost 10 years now, I believe.
Hmm.
So one day I was on this car and I was sitting in this car, right? And I hear the roaming of a truck right next to me. So I looked out and I saw a truckload of sheep. Like they're probably getting carried to the slaughterhouse. So then I started thinking, why do these sheep have to get slaughtered? So it's kind of a aha moment for me.
Hmm.
So that night I ordered some barbecue. And then I said, this will be the last chunk of meat that I eat. So I finished those meat and then I became a vegetarian because I think I have the ability and the um, responsibility to protect these animals, even if it might be just me. Yeah.
Interesting. So, like before the event, have you like thought about this issue like morally, for instance, or talked with this issue with your mother, and the event was some kind of like catalyst, or is like the event by itself the reason you changed vegetarianism?
Yeah, I think more of the former actually. So of course, my mom, I live with her, so she has a very heavy influence on me, and I've decided to become a Buddhist long before this event. And most Buddhists, they are vegetarians. So I've been thinking about this issue, and this event is indeed kind of a catalyst for me, um, because of the like Buddhist influence I got there, and just that site. Mm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if you can perhaps go into a little bit more detail of what do you think is the connection between Buddhism and vegetarianism? Because I went to Tibet to see some like Buddhist temples, and
Mm.
Buddhists there they actually do eat meat because the winter there
Mm.
is way too cold, um, and they need meat in order to survive as well as thrive in such a cold environment. So it seems like the rejection of meat is not so categorical, but it's also a strong moral
Mm.
imperative. What do you think Buddhism stand on this issue?
Yeah, great question. So I've talked about this with my mom, of course. Like, if I want to be a vegetarian, I also want to know why should I be one when I am a Buddhist. So yeah, as you said, there are different forms, different sects of Buddhism, and Tibetan Buddhism. Indeed, I believe they eat meat in order to survive. But I believe the form of Buddhism I follow, Mahayana Buddhism, they generally prohibit you from eating meat because they believe that everything, every, how do I say, conscious being has souls. So they might be a reincarnation of a human before. And by killing them and eating them, you're preventing them from reaching uh, enlightenment in this this world, in their current life. So you cannot do that. You cannot prevent something from having the possibility to reach um,
Mhm.
enlightenment. But only animals, like currently, and humans. well, humans are animals. They have the ability to do that. They're conscious. So plants, they don't count. So yeah, that's what I believe. But of course, in Tibetan Buddhism, I guess they place a heavier emphasis on humans than animals. Like, and they don't really have a choice. So to ensure their own survival and their possibility of reaching enlightenment, yeah,
Mhm.
they still eat animals.
Interesting. I have
Mm.
I have two follow-up kind of questions. So the first is that why can't we reincarnate into plants? I mean, I certainly heard like stories of like really large trees being the reincarnation of some like wise person. I'm sure you've heard those stories too. So I wonder if this is like a loophole or anything in
Yeah,
the
I actually do
doctrine.
know a bit.
Um,
So I
like,
believe the
what does the doctrine
Buddhists, they
really
believe
say?
that there
Or
are
if you don't know,
six
it's fine
realms
too.
of existence.
Like, can you
So
reincarnate?
hungry ghosts, humans, animals, asura, and but they don't
Right.
include plants.
There's also another one between angry ghost and and animal and human. I think it's like some demonic creature. Anyway, so plants are not included. Interesting. Yeah. And another question I have would be like you're a biologist, right? So when we look at, the aggregate of all living conscious things, when we look at it, it's quick to see that perhaps like 90% are in. So like if you're going to reincarnate, chances are you're going to reincarnate into an insect. How does that like the do you think that an insect, for instance, really bears the same moral value as a sheep, or is there something else that makes it different? Because based on the soul argument, they would be the same in this respect. I see. Henry, do you have anything to ask or say?
Yeah, I wonder like, well, I was like tentatively vegetarian for like a week, but like I was like really starting to question like I just don't really see the connection between the wrongfulness of production of these meat and like the wrongfulness of the individual consuming these meat. Like I don't really see where the individual where the obligation comes from. So what do you think? So you would agree that like by I don't know like in the future maybe like a decade later, right? You might be like paying rent to this landlord who you know like who you know is gonna use your money to like buy meat and eat, right? But like, so you think you are like obliged to be vegetarian, but you think you're not obliged to not pay the landlord or like to find some other vegetarian landlord. Right, but like by paying him rent, like aren't you also contributing to the demand of like to this the supply of animals? Right. So like like by I don't know by living in a city by going to bases, right? Like we're more or less we're contributing to animal suffering, but we don't consider the stopping of these like as our obligation. But you do consider not eating meat an obligation. Like why do you draw the line there as like your obligation?
Right,
Right.
but that seems to that's that claim you have that it's relatively like we don't need to do too much for this seems to depend on how strong you think the argument against eating meat is. I mean, if you think the argument is very strong, then perhaps the moral obligation that comes with it is also going to be very strong. So I'm still kind of not grasping like the full extent of the reincarnation argument. I assume that if you treat all souls as equal, then it does seem like a very strong obligation. In fact, I think a good way to measure how strong an obligation is to compare the moral status of animal to the moral status of human beings. So like, to what extent are animals and humans like on the same bar morally? And so far, it seems like the reincarnation argument suggests that they're on the same bar. There is the equality. So that is problematic, right? Because if that's true, then we certainly seem that we ought to sacrifice more than just vegetarianism. That's true, but didn't the Buddha say all beings are equal? 众生平等. Okay. I want to talk about like the doctrine of reincarnation a bit more. Because my father is a Buddhist too, and I sometimes have these kind of discussion. And one thing that's deeply troubling me, like in this doctrine, that the doctrine is in two parts. First, after we die, we're going to be reincarnated into another newborn. It could be an animal, a human, or even some kind of demigod, and this process happens to everyone except the enlightened, but enlightenment is quite rare. Um, this is the one, and the two is that if we do good, we are going to get a better reincarnate. If we do bad, we're going to get a worse reincarnate, and this is supposedly regulated by some omniscient force. So you can't just do some like bad secretly and get away with it. The reincarnation would reflect everything you do. Okay, so that's a doctrine, and here's my kind of problem with it. Of course, it's not really a scientific problem, but a moral one. If people are born based on their karma, then they deserve what they have. So why should we help them? Like if a pig gets born in a factory farm, then it probably was like a murder in its last life. So why should I help it? Like it deserved what it got. Well, okay. So you right. So you're not helping them because they're being treated unfairly. You're helping them so that they can better reach nirvana. I see. Um, okay, that's interesting. And indeed, I think that I discussed this claim with quite some Buddhists, and I like this issue crops up more conspicuously when it comes to things like social work and charity, right? Like, why do we do social work? Why do we do charity? Like, what's the real point of that? If everyone gets what they deserve. Okay, that's interesting. That's actually not a unique problem to Buddhism. I think that's a problem that most religions have to deal with. Um, for instance, like when someone commit a crime, why do we punish him? Like he's gonna get punished by God anyways. So we should just leave him be. Uh, like why try to interfere with this divine pattern that is so just? Um, okay, and that's well one of the reasons I support secular humanism. That's not the only reason, but it's one of them. Okay. Um, another thing that I wish to discuss is more generally between the right kind of relationship one's religious views and one's moral views um should stand in. So, you already mentioned that like your moral view is not entirely constructed on your religious views, which personally I think is a good thing. I think that constructing your moral view entirely on your religious view can be quite dangerous. Um, now, this brings me to a thought experiment I read a while back in a book called The Pig That Wants to Be Eaten. We can talk about this later as well. Um, and that thought experiment is basically suppose you're like consider this person called Sarah. Sarah wants to act morally. It's her life's goal, and she does all she can to act morally. And then one day she meets a friend, Jack. Now Jack is a professional moral philosopher, and he knows many sophisticated arguments. And of course, Sarah is a rational person, so Sarah asks um, for help, and Jax gives her like such a fabulous argument that basically the upshot is that she have to kill 10 person in order to present a moral disaster, and she of course thought that was morally atrocious. But then she cannot win the argument, and Jack's reasoning seems very good. Perhaps Jack is proposing like some kind of terrorist attack would be prevented, or just some kind of moral reasoning that makes a lot of sense. And I think this is kind of an analogy to religion. Like people may be persuaded by religion, but not necessarily feel comfortable with its moral views. And here's the question: should Sarah trust her gut and not commit the morally questionable action? Or should Sarah trust her intellect and believe that what Jack said is probably right because there's no way for her to rationally refute it? Which one do you think is the right path for Sarah? Hmm. So you think she should trust her gut rather than like rationale? Interesting. Well, Sarah is a real person in Middle East. Anyways, uh, let's talk about the pig that wants to be eaten. Of course, the previous question is quite interesting, and I hope to explore it a bit more. And also, it has an important role in what's called like meta ethics. Like what really is the job of ethics? Should we listen to the philosophers? Is that what we should do, or is like this philosophy thing like kind of useless, and we should just like you know be good people? Like just be good. Which of the two? Okay. Okay. Anyway, um, I I think that I'm actually weighing more on the rationality side. I think she should do what rationally appeals to her. But of course, in the actual story, the ending was very tragic. Because she trusted the leader. But I still, I think that intuitionism definitely has a big problem, and the problem is this. I think we should. Uh, I think the reason this conflict arise is that we have a lot of personal biases, right? And of course, in this particular example, uh, that's quite extreme. But I do think that in a lot of other issues like vegetarianism, many people may be biased against it from the outset. So I do think that that's where we should listen to rational arguments, um, and so on and so forth. But what I do have a problem with is two things. First is a lack of epistemic virtue. So epistemic just means relating to knowledge, and virtue, of course, just means something you should cultivate. I think that people should cultivate more epistemic virtues so that they can, um, identify the right and wrong arguments, the correct and incorrect, valid and invalid arguments. That's one. Second is I think that it's very dangerous just like generally to base your worldview on some kind of metaphysical claim. Um, this can be the existence of some kind of supernatural being or force. Um, I think it's dangerous to base your worldview on that. It's not necessarily bad. Some people definitely became more moral after they committed to this metaphysical thing. You hear about this in like prisoners repenting to God and so on, but it does entrench you in a fixed location. Like it's very hard to get out of this place after you have set it in stone. Literally, it's like the God literally carved His moral teachings in stone. Like you're literally setting your current moral worldviews in stone. I think that's where the epistemic virtues get lost. Yeah, so that's like my take on it. I think one, we should take moral arguments seriously, but two, we should be aware of any metaphysical grounding for morality. Okay, as a genetic scientist, um, you probably have considered this issue. Um, and genetic engineering with CRISPR and all is very fascinating. Um, so, what if we can genetically engineer a pig? Um, I forgot her name. Let's just call her Lucy. Okay. If we can engineer the pig so that she wants to be eaten, and this is like her life's aspiration. So let's just imagine that she's born in a pretty good environment. She's very well treated, but she just wants to be eaten. Just like you and I want to go to a good college, she just wants to be eaten. And that's not because there's anything wrong with her. It's just because that's how we genetically coded her. Um, now is it wrong to eat Lucy? Like if you're like friends with Lucy and Lucy comes up to you, like, hi, like I think it would be an honor to be eaten by you, and I think that it would be a great fulfillment for me, um to be able to be eaten by you. And so would you eat her, like, in that case? Right. Right. Well, I think in the person case, there's a slight difference. I think in the person case, it's more like the person is probably temporarily deluded and may regret the decision sometime later, and that's the reason. But Lucy is not temporarily deluded or anything. That's really her life's aspiration. Like, she's not going to regret this anytime. Um, that's one difference. The second, on like reincarnation, I think two things. First, it depends on when you think the soul enters the body, and this is like a pretty controversial issue in the context of abortion. But let's just ignore all that for now. And I mean, I do think genetic engineering, I suppose, it happens in quite an early stage. So well, obviously, you can't engineer a bunch of cells at the same time, right? Well, like I'm not sure the detail, but I think embryonic. Yeah, maybe in the future. I like to be genetically engineered. But I think that I'm a bit too old for that. Um, well, okay, but I don't think it plays a really significant role in our discussion per se, because, um, well, there's two possibilities. First, reincarnation, the compensation and all, it just happens at birth, and then you're on your own. Like your previous karma, it gives you a birth, and then you're like off on your own. You can do whatever you want. Um, Wait, 1 second. Okay. The second possibility is that reincarnation takes into account your entire life. So it's really omniscient into the future as well. And it reincarnates you into a life that, like, has an overall moral value that's equal to your karma. And those are two possibilities. So in the first possibility, there's nothing special about genetic engineering. It's just you getting lucky after you get born. So like if after you get born, like, and you got lucky, well, that happens all the time, doesn't it? So that's not an issue. Oh, if God is omniscient and your entire life is being considered, and that's also not an issue because genetic engineering would be a part of that life. Um, so those are two of my like initial thoughts on the point of like I just want Lucy to achieve reincarnate. Pardon me, I just want Lucy to achieve enlightenment. I mean, suppose that if she is not eaten, she's going to suffer from a lot of agony and depression, as we would suffer if we don't get into a good college. Do you think that it's okay to put her through this ordeal for some kind of abstract goal that you have and Lucy certainly don't care about? So, you think that Lucy should care about reincarnation. She doesn't, and she wants to choose an alternative path. But you say no, and you put her through this whole ordeal of depression and suffering. I mean, this doesn't seem to me uh, particularly comfortable. Like, right? Like, do you get what I mean? Right. I think what we should do is we should locate the problem not with eating Lucy, but with genetically engineering in the first place. So like the eating part, I have really no deep issue with. It's the first part. Like, why are we genetically engineering them to think that way? That's the part that I'm questioning. So, yeah.
Wait,
True.
I don't. Sorry. Um, yeah, I don't really see a problem with that because if you don't genetically engineer the pig would not be Lucy. The pig would be Liam or some other pig, right? But Lucy's life was worth living, right? These genetically engineered pigs, they have worth living lives. So I don't really see a problem with that, with genetically engineering.
But we ought to create the best life.
Well, how do you know? Wait, so you're saying that genetically engineered lives are just like, they tend to be not as worth living as like
Well,
normal lives?
Lucy's genetic engineering is not worth it. I'm not against genetic engineering overall.
Wait, why is Lucy's not
I'm not saying it's
worth
not worth
living?
living. I'm just saying if we can create a new being, we better create a good one.
Sure, but like,
Yeah,
how's Lucy's life not? I mean, Lucy's life
I'm
is
not
her
saying that.
best one.
Yeah, I don't have anything
Yeah,
against that. But I'm just saying if we have to create
right.
anything, we better create the best one.
Wait, I think that's sort of problematic.
Why is it problematic?
I mean, if you put yourself under this veil of ignorance, right? You don't know if you're Lucy or like some non-genetically engineered pig. You
Right.
would not want the human to like to pick the best, to pick the life that will produce the most utility, right? Because
I
you want to
would want.
live. You don't know. Yeah.
I
So
would want to
you would want that, but
because I
there's a
don't know
chance
if
that you're
I'm Lucy
Lucy.
or not. Yeah, but there's also a
Well,
chance that I'm Leon,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I think Leon being into existence is better.
I guess. But like, isn't that sort of like a monopoly of like lives worth like more worth living against like lives less worth living?
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
Well, it seems that there's something wrong with that. Don't you think
I don't
so?
see anything wrong with that. If I'm a parent, I'm gonna create the best children possible.
Well, I guess.
Non-identity is a population problem. It's not an individual problem. Anyway, let's go back to the original topic of vegetarianism. So, Henry, do you want to ask some of the questions that we talked with Miss McLean? Mm,
Mr.
Like we
McLean.
yeah, McLean took.
Yeah. What's the question? I guess. Yeah. Yeah, well, again, I don't really see. Like, I just don't see where the individual obligation comes in, right? I take it that it's probably morally good to like be vegetarian, if we can talk of morally being morally good, but like I can't really see where the obligation comes from. Like, given that we live sort of in a more in a more systemic society, in the sense that like more or less, but just by living here, we contribute to animal suffering.
Oh, I've got a few questions that I'd like to ask. Um, the first one is, do you think is it natural or unnatural for people to eat meat? Um, just don't take it morally, just like natural or unnatural from a evolutionary perspective. Okay, I see. Uh, Another question I may have is, what is what do you think about synthetic meat, like meat generated from stem cells? But here's the Lucy Plus experiment. The Lucy Plus experiment is an improvement on the previous Lucy experiment, and it still involves a pig, and it still involves genetic engineering. But this time, we don't just genetically engineer her to want to be eaten. We genetically delete the part of the gene that creates the brain. So Lucy will be born without a brain. But, we compensate for that by like inserting a chip that controls her movement. Do you think then it's okay to eat Lucy? Because she literally is born without a brain. That sounds really messed up. I think that's fake news. Oh, good. I think it does. Yeah, but how far really is animals from this picture of a no-brainer? Um, like some insects, for instance, do look like a no-brainer because their brain is like so simple. We can literally, like, I think for a kind of sea slug or something, we can literally see like their neural network like firing. Like that doesn't that seems okay to eat, doesn't it? Like how far is that from Lucy Plus?
Yeah, in fact, I think like sorry, go ahead.
But what's so special about a neural network, though? Like the complexity. Let's just suppose here. I didn't do the research, but suppose the neural network's complexity is just as complex as one of the robots you make for your local Vex robotic competition. Like suppose it's as simple as that. Like, what's so special about being neural compared to being a code? Like, it's just like, okay, the signal travel here, it travels back, and you can like figure out all the patterns. Like then it's just a machine. Like there's nothing incredible about that, right?
I was gonna say that like a lot of like vegetarian philosophers like Peter Singer and like Michael Humer, like they think it's okay to eat insects and like it's okay to eat animals like up to shrimp, because like after that like they begin to feel pain. Like we have good evidence to think that they begin
Whoa.
to feel pain.
I thought shrimps do feel pain. They hop
Uh,
around so
not
rapidly, you know. They like slap, 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 and then go.
yeah, but like that could be just like a biological sort of reaction without feeling pain,
Well, I think
I
as science
guess.
advances, we're just gonna see more and more animals being included in this like blacklist. You know,
Yeah.
right? Like fish, for example, they seem like pretty dumb as shrimp. Um, and you know, on the problem of like consciousness and other minds, like Hugo, do you believe in the scientific method? Okay, then here's a problem for you. How do you know that I'm conscious? Because look at this, right? What the core of the scientific method is this. Scientific method uses induction. And here's how induction works. This F is a G, that F is another G, that F is another G, and I go on for a long time. And then I see a new F and I say, this new F is probably a G too. This is how science works, right? This is how induction works. Okay. Now, how do you know that I'm conscious? Well, first of all, you know that yourself is conscious, but that's it. So you only have one sample size. Your sample size on consciousness is one. So how can any induction argument work? It cannot get off the ground. Yeah, and I think the
Well,
problem
I
is
guess.
not just you can't never be sure. The problem is not that because I am not sure whether I am in a podcast, but I am justified in believing them a podcast from direct observation. So, there's things that we can't be sure, but we nonetheless can have scientific justification. But for the case of other minds, it's one, we're not sure, but second, we can have scientific justification. So like we can't even rationally say that, you should believe this. Yeah, Henry.
Well, it seems that the best explanation we have towards the things we observe in other people is that they have minds. Like, for example, me and you, we behave in a huge array of like similar ways. And the best
Mhm.
explanation for that probably would be that you also, have a more or less similar mind to mine.
That's a good point. And you're pointing towards actually a third type of reasoning. So, of course, we know deductive reasoning, right? We know inductive reasoning. There's also abductive reasoning, which is reasoning to the best explanation. And this is another type of reasoning that's used in science when induction doesn't work as well. But here is the problem, right? Like, how do you um how do you know that your kind of behavior is correlated with conscious experience? It seems like okay, you're saying the explanation for this kind of behavior is consciousness, but that is a correlative claim. You're claiming that consciousness correlate with this type of external behavior. But how is that correlation established? Again, you only have one data point. There's no correlation when you only have one data point.
Well,
So
we
so
have
it seems like
multiple
in
data
order for
point.
that abductive argument to work, you're still postulating some sort of correlation, and that assumes that other people are conscious in order for that correlation to be justified. So it is also very hard to get off the ground.
I think we have sort of like some evidence that it doesn't necessarily assume as much. For example, we have evidence that like when people's like when parts of like a person's brain like gets damaged, um, he's likely to like lose some emotive or ethical reasoning abilities. We repeatedly observe that. So what do you think about that? Do you think that it provides some sort of evidence towards other minds?
That's an interesting claim. But I don't think the evidence is good enough because again, we can't assume anything about other people's consciousness. So, you know, even though they may claim their external behavior may, or they may even say to our face, like, look, I'm conscious. I got hit. I'm less conscious. But there's no reason why we should take that claim seriously, because again, we don't have direct evidence, we don't have correlative evidence, and we don't have inductive evidence. Yeah, so this is Wittgenstein's problem. Okay, well, it's very good to have this discussion, but unfortunately, I think we would have to end it here. We will talk with Mr. Casterline after this. But thank you very much for coming here, Hugo, and we definitely learned a lot from what Buddhism means for vegetarianism, and have a nice rest of your day. With pleasure. Okay. Well, thank you very much.